Welcome to Econtalk, part of the Library of Economics and Liberty. I'm your host, Russ Roberts of George Mason University and Stanford University's Hoover Institution. Our website is econtalk.org, where you can subscribe, find other episodes, comment on this podcast, and find links and other information related to today's conversation. Our email address is mail@econtalk.org. We'd love to hear from you. Today is March 2nd, 2010, and my guest today is Don Boudreaux of George Mason University. Don, welcome back to Econtalk.
Always good to be here.
Our topic for today is public choice, the application of economics to political science and the political process. And I want to start us off with a story that you are the cause of. In a couple of podcasts back with Garrett Jones, I referenced a letter you wrote, a letter to the editor on the death of John Murtha. I want to reprise that, my reaction to that, and let you chime in. I also want to mention some of the reactions we got from listeners. John Murtha passed away a couple weeks ago, and he was lauded on the front page of the Washington Post and his obituary as the king of pork, that he had done a very good job bringing goodies back to his home district, his constituents. And you wrote, and I thought a very, very clever and thoughtful point that if a person went around the country breaking into other people's houses, stealing their money, taking their cars, burgling houses and breaking into banks, and then came back and distributed the proceeds to one's buddies in one's hometown, you would be considered a thief, not a hero. But somehow, when a representative of the U.S. House of Representatives does it, it's considered he's a good politician or a successful politician. And I made the remark that agreeing with you, I said it's a shame that people aren't embarrassed to be that kind of politician rather than taking pride in it. And I want to add a couple footnotes to that conversation, and I'll let you chime in. So I want to say I don't want to be naive. I may have said in that podcast that there was once some good old days when people didn't act in such ways that were beneficial for them and not good for the body politic. And that may have, that's naive. I think people have always tried to bring home goodies to their constituents. I just think there used to be less scope for it, and so I don't think it was as prevalent. But sure, people have always tried to get army bases put in their districts and dams built in their districts and all kinds of things that the government can do to make a politician look good. Second point I want to make is that some people get very, very upset that I had been so critical of democracy, that this is part of the democratic process, that inevitably there's quid pro quos in politics, and to be so critical of it, to call it theft, isn't productive to the enterprise of good government. And I disagree with that. I think it's really important that we expose government as being unproductive when it is unproductive. And in particular, I think it's important to distinguish between democracy and various forms of democracy that happen in practice. So the idea that the will of the people, whatever that means, and we'll get into it, should have some impact on political outcomes. That's a good idea. It sure beats tyranny. The idea that majority rule, for example, is a good idea that has some golden specialness to it, I think is dangerous. And that what makes the United States so successful historically is the fact that we're a constitutional republic. And one of the roles of the Constitution is to stop government from doing things that are closer to theft and less like things that government ought to be doing. So I just want to clarify, I'm not an anarchist. I'm not a romantic about the past roles of government. I think government was a little more effective in the past because it did less. So I'll stop there, and I'll let Don, I want to get your comments to that conversation.
Well,
and then we'll move on to some other topics.
It's certainly true that is the way modern democracy works. But, David Hume taught us by exposing the what he called the naturalistic fallacy, that that just because something is doesn't mean it ought to be. It's true, that's the way it works, but that's not the way the world should work. We should not have, in my view, and I'm making a value judgment, of course, but I think it's a value judgment that's widely shared, an institution in which people are able to take resources from others, bring them back home for their own benefit and for the benefit of their buddies. That is as blatant as the institution we have now. Pork barrel politics, which is what John Murtha was very, very good at, allows him to do exactly what thieves would do in the example that I gave you. The fact that it's common, the fact that it's typical, does not make it right, and it doesn't, in my view. In fact, it makes it incumbent, as you suggest, upon us to point out that that's the underlying reality. You know, you go to what Frank Charteroff was a great writer in mid part of the 20th century, and he said, you know, you go to Washington and you see these beautiful buildings, these marble columns. It looks very majestic, and it's true. I mean, I live near Washington. It's a pretty city. These pretty wonderful wonderfully designed buildings. Much of it neoclassical architecture, and that glorious facade hides a lot of really nefarious behavior. And the fact that the people who commit that behavior are elected to office, the fact that they have titles, the fact that what they do is not legislated as criminal activity, does not mean that it is good for society. It does not mean that it differs in any fundamental way from activities done by people who are recognized as criminals. As bad, undesirable activities that should be prevented, and the only way that they're going to be prevented or have any hope for preventing those activities is if people more widely understand what the true nature of those activities are.
Yeah, and one of the ways to reduce, to my opinion, to reduce those kind of opportunities is the people who exploit those opportunities is shame.
Yes.
Shame is an underappreciated social force that I think applies not just to the case we're talking about here, but also to Wall Street. A lot of people, this is not an unrelated point. A lot of people say, well, yeah, Wall Street made a lot of money in the crisis, but they have an incentive to do so, and they were just playing by the rules. And of course, if you have a chance to make a lot of money, why wouldn't you? And the answer would be, well, if it's wrong, you still might do it anyway, but if it's wrong and it's destructive and you're betraying your fiduciary responsibility, or worse, if you're manipulating the rules, which of course Wall Street tries to do,
yes,
because government controls the rules, it's not good. And it would be better if Wall Street had a culture that said some of the things that are profitable or immoral, and we're not going to pursue them. That would be better than trying to make them illegal or to keep them from happening through legislative or regulatory changes. And similarly, it would be just great if people in Congress felt that they actually meant the oath of office that they swore when they were elected to keep uphold the Constitution, and when they do things that are not constitutional, even though they're not called unconstitutional, it would be a better world if they said, well, I can get away with this, but I won't. It's a huge part of morality that you and I probably talked about this before. Not everything that's illegal, not everything that is legal is right, and not everything that is illegal is wrong. And you should make to view the legislative those legislative distinctions of legal and illegal as a guide to morality is a horribly dangerous process. Any study of history shows you that. So, I just want to say that I don't want to be naive again about the role that shame might play down the road. But of course, voting scoundrels out of office doesn't require shame. If they don't feel the shame, you can still vote them out of office. And if people felt that these were inappropriate activities for government, they would respond accordingly. Now, one of the problems is that people in the district in Pennsylvania where Representative Murtha was in office, was representing, they are benefiting. They have the same issue. They're the beneficiaries of his skill. So there's a certain natural incentive to keep him funneling those goodies.
Many of them, not certain. I don't even think the majority of them, but
That's a good point. Yeah. Some of those funded his campaigns, presumably the ones who got most of the largesse. And I think we as citizens ought to say no to those things. We would be not literally no. It's not like you don't have to be civilly disobedient and stop the road from being built, but certainly not voting for the candidates who push those solutions. And it's interesting that right now there's actually some attempt by some candidates to stake out a different moral territory that says, I'm not in favor of pork. Now, having said all that, pork's not very big. It's a really, the glass is half full, folks. So we talk about the problems of democracy in the United States, at least at the current time. Current time's a bad phrase. Right at the current time, pork is very out of control, I think, because I think much of the stimulus package was pork rather than actual stimulus. It was the paying off of politically important people. But through most of U.S. history, the part that we would call pork, special interest benefits of the museum built in your district, etc., not. It's small potatoes. Earmarks, we talked about with Garrett Jones, are small potatoes. They're emotionally charged. We get upset about them, but
they pork is, it's true, measured in money terms, even measured in resource wastage terms, but the benefit, quote unquote, of pork for truth-seeking people, for people who want to build a better society, is that it magnifies the pork itself, magnifies and brings into relief the larger, deeper problems. Most people understand that a multi-million-dollar airport paid for with federal funds in John Murtha's rural district in western Pennsylvania that has only, I think, two flights a day and an average of 20 flyers a day. The flights go from there to Washington. That is not a good use of resources. Those resources could have been used in a multitude of ways that are more productive for society at large than building that airport that sports Murtha's name, by the way. And so people understand that, and that when they understand that, when they see that such resource waste exists, and that it is the direct product of modern democratic, I would say, largely constitutionally unconstrained majoritarian government now in the U.S. They then are led to ask, well, what else is going on? If that airport is unjustified, and it's true with small potatoes, perhaps the larger spending bills are unjustified. Perhaps the larger, more generally revered programs are not as deserving of reverence as we might think if we didn't see this pork. In a way, pork is it's an unfortunate thing for the folks in power, because it helps expose the broader public in a way that they can better understand to the true nature of what's going on in Washington.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, because I think there's a straw man that classical liberals have to answer and help destroy, which is people say, well, these free market types, they have some interesting ideas, but they're against government. I think you could read Don and I both blog at co-blog at Cafe Hayek, and a lot, some non-trivial amount of what we write is along the lines we've been talking about, and you might think that on the basis of that, Don and I are anarchists because we think government is a dangerous way that steals money from citizens and abuses power. Of course, government does steal money and abuse power. That's our point, but that's not all the government does, and it's certainly, at least in my view, and I'll let you give yours, not a view that says that therefore we should have no government.
I actually call myself a philosophical non-stater. I don't use the term anarchy because it means no law, and I certainly believe in law. I think philosophically, it's an interesting philosophical question. How far can you push? How far can the privatization of collective actions be pushed? We know from historical studies that it can be pushed pretty far. We know, for example, now that money can be supplied privately in a way that 50 years ago, because there wasn't the research, no one, even Hayek, thought it could not be supplied.
Although at the end of his life,
at the end of his life, because of some of this historical research, Hayek changed his mind and advocated what he called the denationalization of money. So I think it's an interesting question how far it can be pushed. I certainly would not push the button today and get rid of all government. Social institutions and expectations couldn't stand such a thing, and we would then descend into anarchy pretty quickly. Genuine,
chaos.
Horrible anarchy. Yeah, true lawlessness. But the question always is, and this always motivated Jim Buchanan in his work. And Buchanan, of course, is the single greatest figure, perhaps along with Gordon Tullock, in public choice. Buchanan always emphasized that he said, "Look, the question is compared to what? Right? When we ask about the merits of the market, it's not the merits of the market compared to some ideally performing government or some ideally performing dictator. It's the merits of the market compared to government as it is likely to perform, as the alternative to the market is likely to perform. And so, just as it's wrong to hypothesize a perfectly working market and assume that the perfectly working market is what's in reality. It's wrong to hypothesize and believe that there is a perfectly working government. And again, because the popular mind so celebrates democracy and has what I'm quite sure is a mistaken notion, a far too romantic view of democracy's workability. It's incumbent upon us, again, to show that democracy, or government in general, democracy in particular, has certain flaws that most people are unaware of, and being made more aware of those flaws is important for good public policy analysis.
The works of James Buchanan, most of them are online at the Library of Economics and Liberty, and we'll put links to those up on this podcast page. Jim's really a prodigious scholar who wrote in English.
Still going strong at age 90.
Yeah, and for the most part, his work is accessible, and he does not shy from philosophical thinking and the kind of he's very Smithian.
Yes,
in that sense.
Yes. Yes.
Now, are you against democracy?
No, to the extent that we have government, obviously it should in some way be tied to the choices and desires of the people governed by that government. And I'm no genius on these matters, but I suspect that regular, fair elections are probably the best way, kind of the way we do it now, to have democracy. People can debate whether or not you want to have more online balloting and direct election and various issues. I think those are interesting debates, not debates that I'm particularly competent at engaging in. But of course, I'm not against democracy. If to the extent that government exists, it should be in some broadly defined sense democratic, constitutionally restrained, which means not only have certain powers that are explicitly off limits to it, but I like the way the 1787 Constitution does it. It enumerates and grants the powers to the government with the understanding that the powers, not only the understanding, the stipulation in the 9th and 10th Amendment that power is not granted to the government, to Uncle Sam, remain with the states or with the people. wherever they were, prior to the constitutional Constitution's ratification. What I am against is the romanticization. The hard word to say.
Romanticization.
Yeah, of the state, and particularly of democracy. Kenneth Arrow, who's no free market radical by any means, a great American economist, one of the first Americans to win the Nobel Prize in economics. His signature work is showing that
1951
is showing that there is no system of collective choice, be it majoritarian voting, be it appointing a dictator. There's no system of collective choice that generates outcomes that are not arbitrary, somehow arbitrary, that are not somehow where the outcomes are not somehow the product not of the genuine preferences and choices of the voters and the people governed, but instead are the result of the particular mechanisms whereby the collective choice process is carried out.
And inevitably, the mechanisms then help determine the outcome rather than the...
That's a more elegant way of saying what I just said. That's exactly right. Yeah.
I'm holding the book in my hand that John's talking about. We're sitting in my office here at George Mason in Fairfax, Virginia. The book is Social Choice to Individual Values. It is not written in English, by the way.
No, it's very, very difficult.
It's mainly written in mathematics. What's interesting about the book, and I'm glad we're detouring onto this, is that it really should have been the end of welfare economics, but it was not. Mm. And I find it remarkable, welfare economics being the study of choices made collectively, sort of in the absence of politics, hard to really define it carefully. I think economics has done a great disservice to public policy in that by obsessively pointing to market failure, that is that a perfect market doesn't exist, and therefore there's imperfection, leading to the natural implication that I think is widely held that therefore the government should come in and solve the problem, oblivious to the question whether there's an incentive for the powers to be the powers that are to solve problem, the way that we, quote, would like it solved in the textbook is really a pernicious and dangerous idea. The whole idea of efficiency in economics, which has some very important and wonderful aspects to it, opens the door to justifications for government that are, to me, not borne out in practice. They're just theoretical. That they're no more, as you pointed out earlier, they're no more reliable than a claim that markets work perfectly and we just leave everything alone. We don't need laws or anything.
Yeah.
But I would challenge what you said earlier. You talk back with some nostalgia to 1787, a little before our time, but a more preferable argument. Most people don't agree. I agree with you, of course, but most people don't agree with us. Most people prefer discretion to rules. They want to go on a case-by-case basis. They don't want to say this is a violation of this constitutional principle. They want to say this speech is bad. For example, recently the Supreme Court ruled that corporations can fund, say, a documentary in advance of a political election. In a public poll, of course, you can change the wording, I'm sure mattered, but in a public poll, a very large proportion, well above 50% of Americans disagree with that decision. Now, we can debate the constitutionality of it. We're not going to. You and I happen to think, I think that both think it's constitutional, but the idea that we would want to overturn that decision because it goes against the will of the people, or we'd want to ban certain types of speech because most people don't like it. Mm-hmm. Whereas there's a constitutional principle that the government should not be in the business of banning speech. Most people have trouble with that whole concept. They would rather say, well, I agree with the principle, of course, it's freedom of speech, but in this case, it doesn't apply. And I think when we look at the evolution of American political life over the last 200 plus years, there's a steady deterioration of the role of the Constitution in constraining political outcomes. Probably mostly, I suspect, because most Americans don't think that's a good idea. And so, and it's turned out pretty well. You could argue the last 200 years have been generally glorious in American life on virtually every dimension.
Slavery, the big example.
Well, big exception, obviously, but we got rid of it. So, the trend is good. there are many, except there are many things that were not great about the 1750s, 1850s, 1950s. But one could argue that the move away from constitutional constraints has been very beneficial. So what's your answer to that?
Well, I agree with you. I mean, you and I are both big fans of progress, and we both agree that there's been a lot of progress over the past 200 years, indeed even over the past 20 or 30 years. The answer is twofold. First of all, the Constitution has worked in many respects. I am not among the group of people who believe that the Constitution is a dead letter. There are parts of it that are still widely regarded. And I think one of the most important parts of that document is the Commerce Clause.
Describe.
The Commerce Clause is in effect gives the power to regulate interstate commerce to Uncle Sam. Takes it away from the states. In effect, the framers didn't use the term free trade zone, but that's exactly what they created. They created a free trade zone. It turns out to be a free trade zone spanning a continent, a huge continent of many different peoples and landscapes and climates. That free trade that we have from Maine to Hawaii, from Florida to Alaska, allows a huge specialization of labor and prosperity. Property rights are still largely secure in the United States. Not as secure as I'd like them to be, but they're still largely secure. How much it has to do, by the way, with the Constitution, I'm not sure, but I attach great importance to the security of property rights, and U.S. property rights are largely secure. We have never had in this country a government that is so out of control and tyrannical that people just arbitrarily feared for their lives. I mean, there were some horrors, of course. Slavery, the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, and we have, as Tyler Cowen would say, we have a high trust society, and so these social institutions, combined with those parts of the Constitution that still are respected. We still have regular elections. Two houses of Congress, and although the two houses are not
two branches,
three branches of government.
Yeah.
It still works to a great degree. So I don't think the Constitution is a dead letter. There are parts of it, however, that I do think are dead letters. Mostly, well, not indeed, almost all. Section 1, Article 1, Section 8, that specifies very limited powers granted to Uncle Sam, and most of what Uncle Sam does now has nothing to do with those granted powers. There's no way anyone can plausibly read Article 1, Section 8, which spells out the powers that Uncle Sam can exercise, and conclude that Uncle Sam should be in the business of building airports in John Murtha's home district, for example, or bridges to nowhere in Alaska. People can engage in ledger domain and play with words and make the argument. That's what clever lawyers and clever politicians do. But a fair reading of the Constitution, knowing the intent of the mindset of James Madison and the framers, makes it clear that they did not envision a national government with vast powers. They did not envision a vast government whose powers were who could only be stopped from acting when you found a prohibition in the Constitution. They envisioned a government that would be stopped from acting only always whenever it got beyond those very limited powers enumerated in Section 1.
But they lived a long time ago, and
yeah.
Who cares about their intent? And they were wrong. It turns out, would be the claim that all these expansions of the government, I would emphasize social welfare, the bad term, the social spending, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the whole welfare state. Most Americans generally support the regulatory environment we live in, from the FDA to food inspection to the Environmental Protection Agency. Most Americans support, and most Americans agree that those are all good things. So even if they were unconstitutional,
the fact that most Americans support these things does not make them wise or good. The very idea of a Constitution is to create a government that is not tightly tied at every moment to majoritarian passions. And so take, for example, Medicare. Medicare is going bankrupt. I mean, it's in terrible financial shape. Most Americans support it today because of a public choice concept that we call rational ignorance. Most Americans support it today because they don't really know what the situation is. Medicare recipients are getting their payments. The future generations are being taxed to pay for those, and that bill's coming due. And if you're look, if most, even young people don't look 10, 20, 30 years in the future with any clarity. If you're 70 or 80 and someone tells you, whoa, Medicare is going to be bankrupt in the year 2035, or whatever the year is, you might express horror. Oh, that's terrible. But you don't really care that much. You want your check. You want your pharmaceuticals and your doctor visits to be paid for. And right now, Medicare is doing that. But the bill's coming due. Same thing with Social Security. Much of what government does today gets approved. First of all, gets enacted and stays enacted, and even gets approval because the collective nature of what government does means that people don't know the full consequences of the particular programs that they support. I like to talk about rational ignorance.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. First of all, the term sounds weird because you think, well, ignorance, rational. Surely, ignorance is always irrational. Well, all it means is that look, knowledge is a scarce good. It's not free. If it were free, each of us would be geniuses and fully informed about everything in the world. But
it's a good assumption, but unfortunately, it's not consistent with reality.
It's not at all consistent with reality. There's a huge amount that we don't know. Now, you and I spend much of our life, much more of our lives than the typical American, studying public policy. years ago, I went into the library, and I went to the government documents section and found the annual. This must have been 2003, 2004. Code of Federal Regulations, the CFR, as lawyers call it. These are all the regulations promulgated by the federal bureaucracy, that most of which have the force of law, just as if Congress had passed them. I brought a tape measure with me, and I measured the amount of library shelf space that the Code of Federal Regulation takes up. You know, they're sitting on shelves like books, right? And 26 feet of library shelf space. And by the way, that wasn't all of the regulations, because some of the regulations were confidential, top secret, involving the Defense Department. I have no idea how large they are.
8 yards, a little over 8 yards, almost a first down.
Yeah.
Of regulations.
Yeah. Now this is published every year, but each annual volume, each annual public set
collection
contains all of the extant regulations. One's passed back in the 40s, one passed
that are still in effect.
That is still in effect. That's right. And so it takes up a huge space. And by the way, it's the prints are on thin paper. Many of them are double columned on the pages. And so I just closed my eyes after I measured it, and I randomly grabbed the volume off the shelf, because I wanted to test to see if I knew what was in this thing. Grabbed the volume at random, and turned out it was a volume containing regulations from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I opened it at random, put my finger on a page at random, and wanted to see and saw what regulation I found. And I put my finger on a regulation that set up, that created the Southwest Texas Lettuce Growers Association. Right. Now,
well, that's correcting a market failure, because there's
right. Now,
no doubt. I mean, I'm sure, because that's what government does. It corrects market failure.
Yeah. Now, I had no idea that Uncle Sam created a Southwest Texas lettuce grower. Sounds like a cartel to me. I could be wrong on that.
Yeah.
Right. But the point is not so much what is a Southwest Texas Lettuce Growers Association. The point is government does so much. It's impossible to know it all. So the idea that when people go to the polls, they cast informed votes is ludicrous. Most of what government does, people are not informed about. Now, the reason why it's rational to not be informed about it, for two reasons, or one general reason. Time is scarce. Gaining knowledge takes time. Most of us all of us, we have, we need leisure from time to time. We have jobs to do. We have families to take care of. We have relationships to build or to mend. We have lots of responsibilities. We can't spend all that time studying up on public policies, reading all the various theories.
Informed voters. The way the romantic view we have of people in togas sitting around debating public policy in ancient Greece or Rome.
Exactly. And so it takes a little bit of the sheen off of the romantic notion of democracy to recognize that at the margin, most people do and should spend their time attending to those things that affect them most directly. You'd be a poor father if you became a fully informed voter, because you spend all your time in the library or before the screen reading the Code of Federal Regulations.
26 feet, yeah.
And your kids would never know you. In the private market, when you decide to buy a car, not to buy a car, to buy a gallon of milk, not to buy a gallon of milk, the decision's yours. And so you have incentive in each of your market transactions to gather as much information for yourself that you think is requisite given the size and importance of the financial transaction. But despite what the romantics say, no voter will have a discernible outcome on the election. Your vote counts in the sense that it's counted.
It's included, yeah.
But
in the pile.
It will not affect the outcome of an election. Now, people don't like to hear this because it really rankles their romantic notion of democracy. Every vote counts.
I've lectured, by the way, to journalists on this, and when I say that it's, I vote, by the way.
I don't.
Don doesn't. I vote in most, virtually every national election I've had a chance to vote in, and probably some local. I can't count how many I've missed or gone to, but I vote, even though I understand that the actual outcome of my vote is immaterial to the outcome. When I have suggested that to journalists, say, in sessions that I run to communicate economics to journalists, it's greeted with two reactions. First, laughter. Well, of course, what do you mean your vote doesn't? Is it important? Your vote's, it's irrational to vote on an outcome-based decision, and then anger. That there's something un-American about pointing this fact out that no national election,
you will get
in the closest national election in our lifetime, which for most of us was
2000.
Was 2000 or a little older, 1960. Were you alive in 1960?
Barely. But
1960 was also very, very close when there have been a couple really close ones on election where it was decided by dozens or hundreds of votes. If you had stayed home that day, it wouldn't have made any difference.
That's right. Not even in Florida in 2000.
Even in Florida. But what if everybody felt they don't?
Yeah.
They're not. We're just asking the question, what is rational for you to do as an individual? Should you spend time reading to your kid, or should you vote? There's a strong argument for reading to your kid, helping an elderly person with some set of chores, doing a good deed is in many ways more productive than voting, and certainly more productive in the narrow sense of what is accomplished. Nothing is accomplished by an individual vote. Almost nothing. I mean, you can argue, well, the percentage difference then between the candidates. I mean, it's not measurable at even the hundredths of a decimal point in most elections. So, but when you point that out, which is unavoidable, and I'm sure we'll get some angry mail
you will
for having brought this up
will
here.
Be criticized by some of your listeners.
It's just a fact. As I said, it doesn't stop me from voting. I like to vote. I enjoy it. I encourage my children to vote. On this different viewpoint, that's fine. But it's a fact. You can't argue with it. You can debate whether how salient the fact it is or how it should affect your behavior.
The morality of voting, and I'm happy to listen to arguments that there's some moral duty to vote. However, one comes down on that question, the scientific point remains the one you just pointed out. No voter is going to change the outcome of an election.
In a national, I mean, you could argue in a small town. There have been elections that are
to be really
it's happened in history, I think.
Yeah.
That a vote has either been decided by one vote or a tie, where a person
really small numbers, not in. I mean, even the typical small town in America.
It's never happened. It's never happened.
Certainly not in a national election. Now, and it follows from that. This is the point I was making about rational. It follows from that at the margin, the no voter has strong enough incentives to gather as much information about the issues and the candidates as that voter would have if that voter truly believed him or herself to be the decisive factor. And so that's what we mean by rational ignorance. You don't have to like the fact that I don't vote to agree with that point. I don't see how that point can be disputed. there's a reason, I think, why in elections, when you drive in the street, the signs say very little. You just see one candidate has a blue background, name written in red with stars. Another candidate's sign has a red background, his or her name written in blue with stripes and backgrounds. Vote for so and so. It may indicate whether may or may not indicate whether the person's Democratic, Republican, or independent. So voting is not at all analogous to choices made in markets. It's a much more, and I mean this not in a moral sense, but in an analytic sense. It's a much more irresponsible act. There's a response that you get when you act in the market. If you act in a way that's beneficial to yourself in the market, you get that response. I like the car. You like the car.
It's a feedback loop.
It's a feedback loop. There is not that individual feedback loop in the voting process.
Well, yeah. The most dramatic example, I think I got this example from you, is if you have a family of 3 kids and you buy a sports car, and that's your only car, you're going to find out it was a bad choice. Most car buyers, unlike most voters, spend a lot of time, not hundreds of hours, but they read a little bit, they test drive the car, they look at advertising, as you say, the advertising for a car. You actually get to see some of the characteristics of the car, not just the name of the car flashed on the screen, Ford, say, or Toyota.
By Ford, by Chevy.
Yeah, as if that was enough. Although there's brand name, just like in politics,
yes,
there is in there are some parallels. We don't want to overstate the differences. But there's feedback loops in market decisions that are. I mean, you can vote for your candidate. To me, that's undeniable. The rational ignorance is undeniable. What I think is even more fascinating is you get a phenomenon in politics that you would never have. Well, you have it somewhat in maybe in private markets. Maybe you can comment. You buy the sports car, and then you brag about how great it's performing as a carpool car. You're oblivious. It would be as if you keep buying it. By the way, it's not just that you make a mistake. You can buy a cereal you don't like, where markets aren't perfect, choices aren't perfect, people aren't rational in some super human sense in private decisions. You can make lots of mistakes in your private life and your market-based decisions. But usually you stop buying the cereal that makes you nauseous. Usually you buy the the flavor of ice cream you like. But in politics, you can keep buying the same flavor over and over again. It doesn't achieve its goals. It impoverishes the people you think it's helping, and you can be a proud supporter of that candidate forever. Not just while they're in office. After they're dead, you can keep talking about what a great president or senator that person was, oblivious to any as you say, you have no incentive to look deeply into whether that was a wise or informed choice or a horrible error. It's part of your identity, your reputation, your self-esteem. It's a very, very different process.
Yes. I'm going to say two things. One criticism that persons such as myself who don't vote get is, oh well, you're not a good civic participant. You're somehow falling down in the job. I don't think I fall down in the job at all. I spend a lot of time, most of it for free, by the way.
Yeah.
I don't get paid for blogging. Contributing my thoughts. Now, the thoughts may be worthless, but I'm certainly actively engaged.
Policy.
Yeah, and policy. And so I don't see how... I mean, would I be more productive, for example, if I took the hour and a half that it would take me to vote, let's say, cast the vote, or spent that hour and a half thinking deeply and seriously about some public policy issue, and writing an op-ed about it, or a blog post about it. I think in fact, I'm sure the latter. Not so much because I think my blog posts or op-eds are any great shakes, but they may have some effect. Hopefully not negative.
Well, there actually is more feedback loop in the blog.
There's a feedback loop.
Because if you say something stupid and uninformed, at least you have a chance of being challenged.
Yeah.
Whereas if you vote like a moron, there's no cost.
Right. And
there's no cost. I don't mean to hammer on this because I'm sort of doing this preemptively because I know we're going to get some angry emails. If you vote like a moron, there's no cost. Might be a personal feeling of guilt, but your incentive to find out whether you voted like a moron is my second point. It's not very large.
You don't even know. It's right. You don't even know if you're a moron, because most of us learn that we're morons when we act in a certain way, and consequences from those actions befall us. Negative consequences tells us we're moron. If you vote in a moronic way, it's too difficult to trace all the complex effects of your vote onto you. And so, if enough people vote moronically, we'll get moronic candidates. But the negative effects of those moronic votes do not impact personally those people. And let's be clear about what this means. It is true, of course, that if a bad candidate is elected, right, and that bad candidate puts in place bad policies, those bad policies will later hurt not only the people who voted for the candidate, people who voted against the candidate.
Yeah.
The point is, at the time of voting, that act, and it's the individual act of voting that we're talking about, and it's those individual acts that get added up and decide who goes to office and who does not go to office. In the act of voting, there is no consequence to anyone from voting A, B, or not voting at all. And therefore, people are quite unconstrained in being able to express whatever fantasies, romantic notions, anger that they feel without any feedback loop. And I want to say one more thing about.
Yeah, sure.
Another, I think, underappreciated aspect of voting for candidates in political elections. It's appreciated by public choice scholars, but underappreciated by the public. Is and it's underappreciated because we talk about it's the voter's choice. People choose, and by calling.
So hey, that's great.
That's right, and I like choice. And so by attaching the term choose or choosing choice to candidates and the process of electing candidates, we give that, we transfer to that choice process the same good feelings we have about, say, choosing in a supermarket. And there's too much difference between those choices for the political choice to have that good name. If you go, here's an example I often give. If you go into a supermarket, if I see you go into Safeway, and I see you put into your basket, your shopping cart, a bottle of wine, a turkey, and some paper towels, and I don't see you put in diapers, cleaning fluid, bubble gum, and I see you check. I can be pretty darn sure that at least for that shopping trip, you wanted the wine, you wanted the turkey, you wanted the paper towels, and you didn't want anything else that you certainly could have afforded, but chose not to put in your shopping cart. That's not how we choose policies that get implemented. We vote for candidates. Each candidate is a bundle of policies. It's a whole cart. We can assume that they are on honest about what's in their bundle. But so it's like walking into a supermarket and you see before you 2 or 3 pre-filled grocery carts, maybe surrounded with plexiglass, and you get to look inside, and you see cart A, and cart A has the bottle of wine. It has the turkey, doesn't have the paper towels that you do want, but then it doesn't. It also has diapers, and you don't have children in diapers. And then so you look at cart B, and it doesn't have the diapers, and that's good. It does have the paper towels, that's good. It has the turkey, that's good, but it doesn't have the wine. You look at cart C. It's got some other things, some of which you do want, and some of which you don't want, right? And then you choose among the 3 carts. Let's say you choose cart A.
Of course, it's behind, as you say, it's behind plexiglass. It could be that the wine, you might have been able to see
the whole
label.
Other issue. Yeah. It may,
the paper towel thing might not really be a full roll. It looks full, but depends on once you get home, it's only half a roll.
It may be vinegar in a wine bottle, but let's put that issue aside, right? What we can conclude is that you prefer, all that we can conclude is that you prefer basket A, cart A, to cart B and C. But we cannot conclude anything about the individual components in that cart. You may have chosen a basket. Well, in fact, given the way we set up the example, you chose basket A despite the fact that it has diapers in it, not because of the fact that it has diapers in it. You chose against basket B despite the fact that it did not have paper towels, rather than because it did not have paper towels. And so therefore, because of this bundling problem, and obviously there's an obvious analogy with candidates. Each candidate has a position on taxes, the environment, workers' rights, judicial appointments, abortion, you name the issue, and it's if a majority of voters vote for candidate Smith and against candidate Jones, even putting Kenneth Arrow aside, we might be able to say, okay, well, the majority of people truly prefer candidate Smith over candidate Jones. No one really knows if the majority prefers candidate Smith because of his position on, say, taxes, or in spite of his position on taxes. But candidate Smith, of course, quite understandably, he believes that every position that he took is one that is beloved by the voters.
In the campaign.
In the campaign, right.
Well, it's worse than that, of course, because the cart's really big.
It's huge.
And not only is there, you can
because
see,
the rational ignorance, you can't even see everything.
You can't see a lot of the things in the cart because there's issues that are going to come up later. And as a result, you're stuck with some of that stuff that you didn't realize was in the cart.
Right.
Even if you liked everything you saw on the top layer, there's stuff underneath. And of course, and I'm going to, by the way, I want to come and challenge this pessimistic view in a second, but I want to first enhance it. So I am sympathetic to it.
Okay.
Making it worse, of course, is that there's a lot of stuff toward the bottom of the cart that people behind the scenes have worked to get in the cart that you don't know about. The diaper manufacturers, you didn't see the diapers. You found out they were in the bottom of the cart when you got the cart home.
Right.
And the reason that is like, well, what are the diapers doing in there? And the answer is, well, because the diaper manufacturers asked the grocery to put it in the cart. That's the lettuce growers out there.
Yeah.
What we call rent seeking, and the bootlegger and Baptist problem we've talked about here many times. Inevitably, what gets in the cart and which brand of diapers? We might like the idea that the federal government, in principle, we might like the idea that the federal government decide what's this. There's a best way to teach kids how to read. But when the government decides who's going to read and what kind of stuff they're going to use to read at the federal level, there's going to be a lot of people pushing really hard, and just turned out that the people who got the curriculum stuff for reading and the No Child Left Behind legislation just happened to be really good friends of the Bush administration and former administration officials. It's possible that was the best reading material for curriculum, but I suspect not.
Yeah.
And that is the other problem. What you get home in the cart with is not what. Well, let's sit around and decide what would be the best thing to put in the cart. It's not necessarily that stuff.
That's right. And a lot of, to keep the analogy going, a lot of it is truly mislabeled.
Yeah. Right. It's called safety legislation to protect us from terrorists, when in fact it's the guy who makes the scanner is getting rich off it, and it doesn't really affect our safety at all.
Right. Minimum wage legislation. People, the name of it makes people think, okay, everybody is guaranteed a minimum wage. Well, you only guarantee that minimum wage if you work. You're not guaranteed the wage if you don't work. So there's a lot of mislabeling. There's a lot of changing afterward. George Bush the first, of course, famously said in the 1988 campaign, "Read my lips, no new taxes." And a few years later, he raised taxes.
You got a tax cut in your cart. You didn't realize you got it when you got it.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so let me give you. Let's talk about the other view of this. So I'm going to criticize your analogy and then get you to let you defend it. This is just a cheap shot at democracy. This is the way democracy has to be. It's a fact of life. People, any candidate, of course, has a whole wide array of views, and of course, some candidates either change their mind or learn things when they come in office. It's an inevitable reality that the democratic process is imperfect, just like the market. Sure, the market makes mistakes, but so does democracy. Yeah, so sometimes you're stuck with stuff in your car you don't like. What's wrong with that? That's what democracy is. Is that I get some stuff I like, you get some stuff you like, and you're just this is a cheap shot. It's a straw man. You got to have this bundling if we're going to have political outcomes. You can't have a candidate. I get to vote for a candidate on national defense and a candidate on blah 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 blah, and a candidate on this, a candidate on that. That's just part of that. That's like asking. It's like complaining about gravity. It's because it makes us cars burn too much fuel. It's just that's a fact of life.
True. I agree. That is. I mean, these flaws are inherent in collective decision making. In general, inherent in democracy, also in particular. And the answer is two responses. First, that's what I said earlier. I think too many people are not as aware of these flaws as they should be. There is this romantic view of democracy. Consider the reactions that you get from journalists, who
skeptical, cynical,
about just refusing to come to grips with the fact that no vote is going to swing the outcome of an election. And so pointing that out is number one. Just it's true. It's good to know truth. And a second good reason for pointing it out relates to my second larger justification for making public choice arguments, and that is the choice we face is, I like to think of it as always as, increasing the size and scope of government a little bit more, or decreasing it a little, the size and scope a little bit more.
Which direction should we be heading?
Which direction should we be heading? And if people have an excessively romantic view of how government operates because it's democratically elected, then there'll be an unfortunate bias in favor of expanding the role of the state. And so, yes, given whatever role of the state we choose, whatever role that will be, there will be these problems. But the very fact that we now recognize that there are these problems means that we might be more skeptical about turning yet more of our resources and more over to the government, and more responsibility over to the government. We recognize, well, it's not. It may not work as well as we think, because there are alternatives for the vast majority of things to the government. We don't need the government to determine the size of our toilet tanks. Yeah. Now that's a collective decision. We don't need the government to decide whether or not we can purchase goods or services imported from foreigners. That decision is perfectly able to be handled privately, but we turn it over to the state. And the list, of course, could go on and on and on. But so if you and I were to come up with, that list of core responsibilities that you and I feel comfortable giving to government, because private alternatives would work more poorly than the government would. I would still say, well, but it's not going to be perfect. All these problems still exist, but their magnitude and their ill effects won't be as large, because they'll be confined to a smaller space.
Yeah, let me bring up another metaphor that sort of brings these points together, which I also learned from you. I think I heard this about 10 years ago in a talk you gave. That was a phenomenal example, and it really helps you see how to me, how government works in reality, not in fantasy, and why we ought to limit that role in those certain areas. And that would be, what if we chose our cars the way we chose our politicians? So this is a variant on the
sports car,
on the bundle, on the grocery card example. But I think it brings out some important points that I think we may have missed. So if we're all going to drive the same car. Now, we all understand that's not a good idea. Why is it a bad idea? Why wouldn't we want to decide, well, what's the will of the people for cars? And so we could have candidates propose cars, and let's get rid of the problem of politicians who break their promises. Mm-hmm. And let's suppose that they really are going to give us the car that they actually propose. So candidate A proposes minivan, and candidate B proposes a family sedan, and let's have candidate C. There usually aren't three that are viable, but let's suppose candidate C is the sports car. So we've got the minivan, the family sedan, and the sports car. You're not allowed to drive the cars as the voters. You're going to vote for a candidate, and that's the car you get. You can look at the car from the outside. You don't get to try it.
Listen to it honk its horn.
You might. There's a lot of horn honking. Yeah, you hear the radio player. And we'd make a pretty good decision. Excuse me, we could make a pretty good vote. Now it turns out, so I have 4 kids. I might vote for the minivan. Somebody who's single might vote for the sports car or the family stand. Certainly wouldn't vote for the minivan. And it could be the minivan. I understand it's not going to be the best minivan, but I'll get a minivan if my candidate wins. Now, when we start adding to that rent seeking, the idea that manufacturers would be competing in ways that would be very difficult for me to find out as to what the features of the minivan would be. That it would have, say, things that I perhaps don't want. I don't want my kids to watch TV in my car, so the TV manufacturers might lobby the candidate to make sure that's in there. So I get not only would I, at best I'd get a minivan. It wouldn't be the ideal minivan I'd want, but at least I get a minivan. Of course, I might not win. Mm-hmm. My candidate might not win the election. I'd be stuck with the sedan or the sports car. Now, in what sense would that be an ideal outcome? Well, I don't understand that would be a horrible outcome. It would be much better to let people pick and choose. Why? And the answer is because that decision, there's making that decision collectively is not a proper role for government because it costs me an immense amount when there'd be an alternative that I could have there's no reason I couldn't choose my own car.
Right.
And yet we do that with education.
Yep.
We do it with so many aspects of our lives through government. And it's true that if we're doing it that way, well, there's some things that are pretty good about it, and so obviously there's things that are wrong. The central question is what you said. What is the proper role for government? Is this a decision that should be made collectively, or is the non-collective decision a better outcome?
Right.
And
that's exactly
so many things mean, my rule, by the way, we haven't talked about this, and I think we ought to close on this. My rule is government should do for us what we cannot do well for ourselves. Mm-hmm. That doesn't tell you exactly what government should do. We can debate about what those areas are, but picking out a car isn't one of them, right. And cash for clunkers isn't one of them. Right. And the size of the
toilet tanks.
Toilet tanks. You can make an argument for it, by the way, that it should be collectively done. But I don't think it's a very good argument.
You can make an argument for all those things.
Yes, right? You can.
Right. But again, so the important issue is when those arguments are made, and those are arguments that are at the core of political and public policy debates. What should government do and what should it not do? Those arguments will be better informed and result in wiser, at least better understanding. The more deeply and realistically people understand the way politics really works, the way government really works, rather than understand it in some romantic, rose-colored way. And it's that romantic, rose-colored way that remains the dominant lens through which democratic politics today is viewed.
You think that's true?
Well,
really, here's what's strange about that. Most people have a very low opinion of Congress. They have a very low opinion of politicians. They see many politicians as lying scoundrels. How do you reconcile that view with this claim that people have a romantic view of government?
It's right. I think I don't. I myself could never.
You don't have that problem.
No, but I think it's people blame the individual. Let's vote the scoundrels out. Right?
We need a better set. We need a better class of scoundrels.
Right. Well, yeah. I do think that politics certainly selects for a certain type of person. As most occupations select for certain types of personality traits. But the problem isn't with the nature. The chief problem, the ultimate underlying problem, isn't with the nature of the particular scoundrels who are in office or particular people who are in office. It's with the incentives that voters face to put them in office and the incentives that these people face once they are in office, be it an elected office or be it an appointed office in an administrative agency. And it's those incentives that skew the outcome. So when people are asked about particular actions of government, well, I don't like what government's doing now, or it's either doing too much, or it's doing too little, it's not doing what I want. I think they focus on the personalities, but the idea of the regal capital is the people's house, and the president with his veto power and going to the polls, it's still celebrated as an almost mystical collective experience whereby the will of the people
it's a sacred act in many people's lives.
Yeah, and I don't think it's sacred at all. It's, I mean, to the extent that that voting is necessary, it's something that people do, and we hope they do it well. It's nothing more sacred about voting for a congressman or a president than there is about buying paper towels at Safeway. That's going to get you some angry remarks too.
Yeah, I was going to say I don't know if I want. We're almost we should stop soon, but I don't want to stop quite there as you're closing.
Okay.
As your closing comment, do you want to say anything about how we might get there from here? Given that we have this romantic vision, many of us, we don't, but many people do. Given that something we haven't talked about that I think about constantly lately is this idea that if something isn't as good as it ought to be, we ought to spend more money on it, which is something we never do in the private sector, right?
Yeah, it just doesn't follow.
Nobody says if we want better cars, let's go write let's make some donations to Honda and to Ford. Unfortunately, we're doing that right now.
Yeah.
It was a bad example.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting that most Americans understand that that's not a good idea. Most Americans opposed the bailout of GM and Chrysler and said, "This isn't the road to better cars." Everybody understands that set of incentives is misaligned.
They don't understand that those set of incentives are the same ones that are in play in the government school system.
Yeah,
and so when people can, with straight faces, make arguments. Well, we need to give more money to our government schools, our public schools, and too many people say, "Well, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense."
When in fact, what we ought to do is spend the money more wisely. In fact, civilization advances by spending fewer resources to achieve our ends, not more.
That's right.
And we have the same problem, obviously, in healthcare. And I can't resist this just because it's on my mind this week. People who've come complaining about this policy or that policy that might involve health price controls on health care. We have price controls on health care, folks. They're everywhere. The government controls the price of virtually every single aspect of the healthcare process and decides it by some labyrinthine top-down approach, which again is not designed scientifically. It's designed to respond to all kinds of complicated things that none of us who are outside the industry can possibly understand. And so, how do we get to a different outcome, given that you don't vote, in particular? Shame on you, Don Boudreaux, for not doing your share in fighting these phenomena that you're against. How do we get to where you got 30 seconds?
Well,
how do we get closer to a world where government does less and
we
more?
work to build through the promulgation of ideas and also by example. We work to build a culture of freedom and individual liberty, respect for private property. That's not guaranteed to work. There's no button to push. But I am very I think that if that culture is built, then it will be reflected in the political process. I do not believe the political process can lead it. If people want to be led by the nose, or are content to be led by the nose, then government will lead them by the nose. Only by changing the culture. So I do think I do my share. I try to do my share by writing my letters to the editor, and blogging, writing books, teaching, helping students better understand economics. But there are no guarantees. Just because we can identify it there, and we know where we're here, it may be that we can't get there from here. So, my best shot at a New England accent.
Not bad. My guest today has been Don Boudreaux. Don, thanks for being part of Econtalk.
Always a pleasure.
This is Econtalk, part of the Library of Economics and Liberty. For more Econtalk, go to econtalk.org, where you can also comment on today's podcast and find links and readings related to today's conversation. The sound engineer for Econtalk is Rich Goyette. I'm your host, Russ Roberts. Thanks for listening. Talk to you on Monday.